His word says in Philippians chapter 1, verses 27 through 30, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggles you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Now, it's a very interesting passage because this is a time where Paul, the writer of Philippians, is writing to the church in Philippi, where he's visited before. He began this great church, and now he's writing back to them to encourage them to continue, to just let them know that they have to continue to stand firm. But the thing that we're going to focus on is this word worthy. In the first sentence in verse 27, it says, whatever happens, yeah, now clearly something must be going on for Paul to be saying whatever happens. Now, we know that there was persecution during this time. We know that the Christians or believers or those that followed the way, as it was called then, they were under scrutiny. They had Jews who had not received Jesus as Lord and Savior after them. They had kings and they had rulers around them that did not want this Jesus to be glorified or even be followed in this time. Many believers in the first century and even after were lit on fire. I mean, they were torn apart by horses. They were eaten by lions and tigers. So when we see even in the Old Testament, when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was placed in the furnace, these are things that were the norm to those that opposed the kingdom at that time. So when he's saying whatever happens, it's almost like he's saying brace yourself, because then he says, or he gives a bit of a command when he says conduct yourselves. Now, many parents will understand this when I say when you leave the home and we leave instructions for our children, we generally tell them to conduct themselves like they were our children. And what would that really mean? That means, hey, look, I raised you a certain way. Now go ahead and actually live the way that I've taught you how to live. And Paul here is saying, conduct yourselves worthy, right? Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. So it's a different standard now. Now we're not just talking about, hey, worthy of my friendship or worthy of my love. We're talking about worthy of the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, worthy means you're deserving. So the manner deserving to even be allowed to share or to live out or proclaim the gospel during this time. We're not just looking at people who are just living easy lives. We're not talking about people who could go to Starbucks and get a coffee. You know, if they wanted coffee, they had to go out to the fields. They had to pick the beans, roast them, and boil them. Nothing they did was easy. So it would make sense for people of that time to really understand structure and discipline and hard work. But Paul wanted to make sure he understood. He wasn't just saying like, this is going to be a regular hard day's work. He's saying, look, there's a new standard. The new standard that we are to live by is the gospel standard. Now, when we're talking about the gospel standard, we're not just talking about, oh, look what Jesus did on the cross. We're talking about the Jesus, the gospel, the good news, the blood of Christ, the atonement for sin. Now, these are things that keep building and building and building and building to a point where when we begin to truly focus on being worthy of Jesus, or worthy of being seen like him, or even spoken in the same breath, or even being able to minister the way that he ministered, it's a different level. And I really liked the word worthy, and I found it again used again where Paul was speaking to the church in Ephesus. One in Ephesians 4:1, he says, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." Now, these words are used in the same way. This word worthy is used in the same way in these two passages. And with the understanding that they were being persecuted, they were having a really rough time. Has anybody had a rough time where they felt like even the life that they're living right now, if they broke even, they would be all right? But see, we're not called to break even. We're called to break through. Well, right? When we've done all we could do to stand, we stand therefore. We keep moving, we keep pressing, we keep going higher because there's a standard that is much higher than just living on this earth, because this is not our home. So the standards of earth actually shouldn't govern us. So when Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, what he's saying is, regardless of what the status quo may be, how are you going to live? What standard are you going to live up to? How are you going to represent Jesus in this time? And he's not saying, hey, look, just call yourself a Christian, right? Because he gives that warning, whatever happens. Conduct yourself to the very standard that Jesus held himself to, right? He held himself to a standard that he was willing to die for. And that standard was a calling that he received from God the Father. All of us are called to a much higher standard, a much higher discipline, a much higher place. When I was in the military, it was very interesting because though I lived in the United States, the laws of the United States applied to me, but then there was a higher standard. It's called the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Now, this higher standard, where it was not just about the different civil laws, it wasn't just about the different crimes that I ought not to commit. It actually held higher standards of even adultery and how I treated other people, because I was no longer representing myself. So when Paul is referring back to the gospel of Christ, what he's saying is, you're not representing yourself anymore. So the standard, and I keep saying the standard because I think it's a word that many of us either don't like or we look for. So it's a great median to use when we're talking about being worthy or living a life that's worthy. Worthy of what? In Ephesians 4:1, worthy of the call you have received, right? We've been given something. Now, because it was given to us, directions came with it. And the interesting part about the directions, Paul makes it very clear. And he's like, in Philippians 4, so 27, he continues and he says, look, then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel. See, it's the standard. The gospel is the standard. Look, it's not about striving together just to do great things. It's like striving together, holding true, being in harmony for the gospel's sake, because we now represent the gospel. You as a Christian represent the gospel. So if we're representatives of the gospel, we have to understand that when Jesus took upon himself sin so that we could be free, he wasn't just saying, hey, let me do this so that you guys can be okay. He did that so that we can be free, completely free. So if we go into a buffet and we're ready to eat, how much more should we be mindful of how we conduct unto ourselves when somebody else is paying for the meal? Here's a better example. My wife, when she was in high school, she was an excellent student, and a family took a liking to her and sent her to a much better private school. Now, they paid for everything, and she ensured each and every report card would reflect that she did her very best. And to this day, she's still in contact with this same family. And in a few months, when she finishes up her dissertation and she's done, she's able to show them what they poured into. Because now she's not just living a life or going to school because of her own desires. It's because somebody else paid a price. And because someone else paid a price, there now is more value placed on what you're doing. Because Jesus died so that we can be free, this life now has much more value. And because it has more value, we have to look at the life that we've been given and understand that not only it doesn't belong to us, but now we have to understand what it cost. So when Paul reminds his brothers and sisters in Philippi and even in Ephesus to live lives that are worthy, he's saying, look, remember how much it cost. Because God sent his only begotten son because we were worthy to be bought. It's not that we had this grand value on the surface. It was God saying, look, you don't understand your value. I do. And because you're so valuable, because you're beautifully and wonderfully made, because you were created in the image of God, I now have to pay a high price so that my image isn't tarnished. Right? It's God's image. It's his gospel. This is his life that he's given to us to carry out something that will magnify his awesomeness, his greatness. So no matter what happens, he paid the price so that we can go and do great things. So regardless of what may come our way, and he says this in Philippians 4:28, it says, well, let me back up to finish up verse 27. It says, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel. Now listen, in verse 28, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. It's like, look, for the gospel's sake, you got to press, regardless of what may come, regardless of who may come after you, regardless of what trials and tribulations. You have to press. You have to go forward. You got to keep moving. You got to keep going into these greater places with an understanding. There's going to be suffering. There's going to be challenges. There's going to come a time where you're going to have to suck it up and go through some harder things because the prize is at the end. Namely, that prize being seeing him. Now, the only example that I can give you that most of us will really understand, and the mothers out there would really understand, and the fathers out there would really understand is that process of watching a woman go through 9 months, 10 months of carrying a child and knowing that that child is being developed and we have to protect that child. But that child is the prize. And mothers have to go through hard times for that child to come into this world. But if that child is considered valuable, those parents will do whatever it takes to ensure that that child is brought forth and brought forth in a way that will show everyone how valuable this baby really is. What are you willing to go through? to get to the place that God has called you? Secondly, are you living a life worthy of the gospel? Does your life look like Jesus Christ? And lastly, I think most important, if opposition comes, are you willing to go all the way through, regardless of what stands in your way, so that God can be seen, so that Jesus can be seen, so that he can be glorified in your life and draw others closer to him? God bless you. Pray this word inspired you, encouraged you, and even challenged you. Have a great one.